Elena Vasquez had never seen so much money in one room. The ballroom of the Grandview Hotel looked like something from a dream. Giant chandeliers made of crystal hung from the ceiling. The walls were covered in gold and white designs. Men wore suits that fit perfectly, and women floated around in dresses that sparkled under the lights. Everything smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers. But Elena was not a guest. She was carrying a tray of champagne. That morning, her neighbor Rosa had knocked on her door looking stressed. Rosa ran a small catering business, and two of her workers had gotten sick at the last minute. She needed someone to help serve drinks at a big charity event that night. The pay was good, and Elena needed the money. So she said yes. Now she wished she had said no. Elena was 34 years old. She lived in a tiny apartment in the Bronx with her mother, who had been sick for many years. Every day was the same. She woke up early, made breakfast for her mother, gave her the morning medicines, and then taught piano lessons to neighborhood kids for a few dollars an hour. In the evenings, she cooked dinner, helped her mother to bed, and then sat alone in the dark, wondering how her life had turned out this way. 10 years ago, everything had been different. Elena had been a student at one of the best music schools in the country. She was talented. Her teachers said she had a gift. She could play piano in a way that made people stop and listen. She had dreams of performing on big stages, of traveling the world, of making music her whole life. Then her father left. He disappeared one night without any warning. No note, no goodbye. He just took whatever money they had saved and vanished. Elena's mother, already struggling with her health, fell apart completely. Someone had to take care of her. Someone had to pay the bills. Someone had to give up everything. That someone was Elena. She dropped out of music school 3 months before graduation. She moved back home. She found whatever work she could. And slowly, year by year, her dreams slipped away like water through her fingers. She still played piano. She still taught her students with love and patience. But the fire inside her had gone quiet. She no longer believed that music could change her life. Now it was just something she did to survive. Tonight, she wore the only nice dress she owned. It was navy blue with a simple design. Her mother had worn it to her wedding reception over 30 years ago. The fabric had faded over time. The edges were starting to come apart. But Elena had ironed it carefully that afternoon, hoping it would look okay. Looking around the ballroom now, she knew it did not look okay. Not compared to the designer gowns these women were wearing. Not compared to the diamonds around their necks and the gold on their wrists. She felt like a sparrow in a room full of peacocks. She kept her head down and did her job. She walked through the crowd offering champagne to people who barely glanced at her. That was fine. She did not want attention. She just wanted to get through the night, collect her pay, and go home to her mother. The event was called the Worthington Foundation Gala. It was a fancy party where wealthy people came to donate money and feel good about themselves. This year, the cause was music education for poor children. Elena almost laughed when she heard that. She had been teaching music to poor children for 10 years. Nobody had ever written her a check. At the far end of the ballroom, near the tall windows, stood a beautiful grand piano. Elena noticed it the moment she walked in. It was a Steinway, one of the finest pianos in the world. She had played on one just like it during her time at music school. Her fingers ached just looking at it. Near the piano, a group of important-looking people had gathered. They were laughing and talking loudly, holding their drinks like they owned the place. At the center of the group stood an older man with silver hair and a perfectly fitted black suit. He had the kind of face that expected everyone to listen when he spoke. This was Richard Worthington, the billionaire, the man who had started the foundation and put his name on the building. Elena had seen his picture in newspapers. He was famous for being smart, powerful, and ruthless. People said he could make or destroy someone's career with a single phone call. Elena had no intention of going anywhere near him. She just wanted to stay invisible. But the ballroom was crowded, and the spaces between guests kept shifting. At one moment, she found herself walking past the group near the piano, her tray balanced carefully in her hands. She did not see the elbow coming. Someone bumped into her from the side. She never saw who it was. Her tray tilted sharply, and before she could catch it, one of the glasses wobbled and fell. Champagne splashed onto the polished floor. A few drops landed on a pair of shiny leather shoes. Richard Worthington's shoes. Elena's stomach dropped. She looked up and saw the billionaire staring down at her. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. The people around him had gone silent. Everyone was watching. "I am so sorry," Elena said quickly. Her voice shook a little. "Someone bumped into me. Please forgive me. I did not mean to." She expected him to shrug it off. Rich people had more important things to worry about than a little spilled champagne. Surely, he would just wave his hand and move on. But he did not move on. Instead, his eyes traveled slowly down her body. He looked at her plain black shoes, her faded dress, the frayed hem at the bottom. He studied her like she was something unpleasant he had found on the bottom of his shoe. Then he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before it strikes. "My goodness," he said loudly. His voice carried across the group, making sure everyone could hear. "They really are letting anyone walk in here these days?" A few people laughed nervously. Elena felt her face grow hot. He was not finished. "Tell me," he continued, tilting his head to one side. He paused for effect. "Or perhaps you simply grabbed whatever you could find at the bottom of a donation bin?" The laughter grew louder. A woman in a red dress covered her mouth and giggled. A man next to Worthington raised his glass, like he was celebrating a good joke. Elena stood frozen. Her hands trembled around the tray. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him that this dress had meaning, that her mother had worn it on the happiest day of her life, that just because something was old did not mean it was worthless. But the words stuck in her throat. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Nothing to say?" Worthington raised an eyebrow. "I suppose that is wise. Now run along before you cause any more damage. Some of us have important things to discuss." He turned his back to her like she was already forgotten. Elena walked away. She moved as fast as she could without running, pushing through the crowd until she reached the service corridor. The door closed behind her, and suddenly the noise of the ballroom became distant and muffled. She set down her tray on a metal cart. Her hands were shaking badly now. She leaned against the cold wall and pressed her palms to her face. She would not cry. She would not give him that satisfaction, even though he would never know. But the shame burned in her chest like fire. She had done nothing wrong. It was an accident. And he had torn her apart in front of everyone, simply because he could. Because she was poor. Because her dress was old. Because in his world, people like her did not matter. She stood there in the dim corridor, breathing slowly, trying to calm herself down. Rosa needed her. Her mother was waiting at home. She could not afford to fall apart. But even as she steadied herself, something else stirred inside her. Something she had not felt in a very long time. She thought about the Steinway piano in the ballroom. That beautiful instrument, sitting there silent and waiting. And deep in her heart, beneath all the hurt and humiliation, a tiny spark began to glow. Elena splashed cold water on her face in the small bathroom near the kitchen. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but she had not cried. She was proud of that. She fixed her hair, straightened her dress, and took a deep breath. She could do this. Just a few more hours. Then she could go home, crawl into bed, and forget this night ever happened. When she stepped back into the service corridor, Rosa was waiting for her with a worried look on her face. "Are you okay?" Rosa asked. "I heard what happened out there. That man is a monster." Elena shook her head. It does not matter. I am fine. Let us just finish the job. Rosa squeezed her hand. You are stronger than you know, Mija. Elena picked up a fresh tray of champagne glasses and walked back into the ballroom. She avoided the area near the piano, where Richard Worthington and his group were still laughing and drinking. Instead, she stayed near the edges of the room, serving guests who paid her no attention. That was exactly how she wanted it. The gala was moving into its main phase now. Dinner had been served. Speeches were about to begin. The highlight of the evening would be a live piano performance during the donation appeal. According to the program, a famous concert pianist had been hired to play, while Richard Worthington gave his speech about the importance of music education. Elena tried not to think about the piano. Every time she glanced at it, her heart ached. That Steinway was one of the most beautiful instruments she had ever seen. The black surface gleamed under the chandeliers. The keys looked perfect, untouched, waiting for someone to bring them to life. She wondered what it would feel like to sit at that bench again, to let her fingers dance across those keys, to lose herself in music the way she used to, back when she still believed in dreams. But those days were gone. She was a server now. Her job was to carry trays and stay invisible. About an hour into the dinner service, Elena noticed something strange happening near the stage. A small group of event staff had gathered in a corner, speaking in urgent whispers. Their faces looked worried. One woman kept checking her phone and shaking her head. Elena moved closer, pretending to arrange glasses on a nearby table. He is still stuck on the bridge, one of the staff members said. Traffic is not moving at all. There was an accident, but the performance is in 20 minutes, another person replied. What are we supposed to do? I do not know. Call him again. Maybe he can find another way. Elena realized they were talking about the pianist, the famous musician who was supposed to perform during the donation appeal. He was stuck in traffic and could not make it in time. She felt a strange flutter in her chest. Part of her felt bad for the event organizers, but another part of her, a small, quiet part she barely recognized, felt something else entirely. She pushed the feeling away and continued working. A few minutes later, the situation got worse. Elena overheard more panicked conversations. The pianist was still stuck. There was no way he would arrive in time. The event coordinator, a tall woman in a gray dress, was practically running around the ballroom trying to find a solution. What about the string quartet? Someone suggested. Their cellist got sick. They already left. Can we just skip the music? Absolutely not. Mr. Worthington specifically requested live piano during his speech. He will be furious if there is no music. Elena watched from the corner of the room as the coordinator made phone call after phone call. Each time, her face grew more desperate. Backup pianists were either unavailable or too far away. The clock was ticking. The donation appeal was supposed to start in 15 minutes. The coordinator finally stopped near the service corridor, leaning against the wall with her hand on her forehead. She looked like she was about to cry. Elena hesitated. Her heart was beating fast. A voice in her head told her to stay quiet, to mind her own business, to keep carrying her tray and pretend she had not heard anything. But another voice, softer and older, spoke up from somewhere deep inside her. It was her mother's voice. Your gift is not for you, Mija. It is for everyone who needs to hear it. Her mother had said that to her years ago, when Elena was just a teenager, nervous about her first recital. She had been so scared of making mistakes, of embarrassing herself in front of strangers. Her mother had held her face in her hands and looked into her eyes. Music is not about being perfect, she had said. It is about touching hearts. When you play, you give people something beautiful. That is a gift. And gifts are meant to be shared. Elena had carried those words with her through music school, through every performance, through every lesson she taught to neighborhood children who could barely afford to pay her. Now, standing in this ballroom full of rich strangers who looked down on her, those words came back again. Before she could talk herself out of it, Elena set down her tray and walked toward the event coordinator. "Excuse me," she said quietly. The woman looked up, clearly annoyed at being interrupted by a server. "Yes? What is it? I heard you need a pianist." The coordinator blinked. "What?" "I can play," Elena said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I trained at a music conservatory. I know the classical repertoire. I can play whatever you need." The woman stared at her for a long moment. Her eyes traveled over Elena's faded dress, her simple shoes, her server's posture. Doubt was written all over her face. "You are the champagne girl," she said slowly. "Yes, but I am also a pianist. Do you have any idea what kind of event this is? These are some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. The performance needs to be flawless." Elena met her gaze without looking away. "I understand. I would not offer if I could not deliver." The coordinator was silent. Elena could see her mind working, weighing the risks. On one hand, letting a random server play at a prestigious gala was insane. On the other hand, having no music at all would be a disaster. Finally, the woman let out a long breath. "What is your name?" "Elena Vasquez." "And where exactly did you train?" Elena told her. The coordinator's eyebrows went up. "It was one of the most respected music schools in the country." "Why did you leave?" Elena paused. "Family reasons." The coordinator studied her face for another moment. Then she checked her watch and made a decision. "Fine. You have one chance. If you embarrass this foundation, if you make me look bad in front of Mr. Worthington, I will make sure you never work in this city again. Do you understand?" Elena nodded. "Good. The performance starts in 12 minutes. Do you need sheet music?" "No. I will play from memory." The coordinator looked surprised but did not argue. She pointed toward the stage. "Go. Get ready. And for heaven's sake, take off that apron." Elena removed her server's apron and handed it to a nearby staff member. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her mind was clear. She walked through the ballroom toward the grand piano, feeling the eyes of strangers on her back. She passed by the table where Richard Worthington sat with his wealthy friends. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She could feel his gaze following her, probably wondering what the champagne girl was doing walking toward the stage. Let him wonder. Elena reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. She ran her fingers lightly over the smooth black surface. It was cool to the touch. Beautiful. Perfect. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. The keys stretched out before her like an old friend she had not seen in years. In 12 minutes, she would play for a room full of people who thought she was nothing. In 12 minutes, she would show them exactly who she was. Elena closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath. She was ready. The ballroom grew quieter as guests finished their desserts and turned their attention toward the stage. Waiters cleared plates and refilled wine glasses. The lights dimmed slightly, creating a warm, golden glow over the room. It was almost time for the main event of the evening. Elena sat at the piano bench with her back straight and her hands resting in her lap. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. Whispers rippled through the crowd, like wind through tall grass. "Who is that? Is she the performer? I thought they hired someone famous. Wait, is that the server from earlier?" Elena heard every word. She tried to block them out, but they seeped into her ears like cold water. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her palms were damp with sweat. She wiped them discreetly on her dress and took another slow breath. She had not performed in front of an audience in over 10 years. The last time was at her music school, during a student showcase. She had played beautifully that night. Her professors had told her she had a brilliant future ahead of her. 3 months later, she dropped out and never performed again. Now here she was, sitting at a Steinway grand piano in one of the fanciest ballrooms in the city, about to play for people who had mocked her just an hour ago. What was she thinking? Near the front of the room, she spotted Richard Worthington at his table. He was leaning back in his chair with a glass of wine in his hand. When he saw her at the piano, his eyebrows went up. A slow, amused smile spread across his face. He turned to the man next to him and said something. They both laughed. Elena knew exactly what they were thinking. They expected her to fail. They expected her to stumble through some clumsy performance and embarrass herself in front of everyone. They were already preparing their jokes. For a moment, doubt crashed over her like a wave. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had made a terrible mistake. She was just a piano teacher from the Bronx. She had no business being on this stage. But then she thought of her mother. She thought of all those years her mother had worked extra shifts to pay for piano lessons. She thought of the second-hand keyboard they had saved up for months to buy. She thought of her mother sitting in the front row at every recital, crying happy tears and clapping louder than anyone else. She thought of her students. Little kids from her neighborhood who came to her apartment every week with eager eyes and clumsy fingers. Kids who reminded her of herself at that age. Kids who still believed that music could change their lives. And she thought of that faded navy dress she was wearing. Her mother's dress. The dress Richard Worthington had mocked in front of everyone. This dress had seen her mother's happiest day. This dress had been worn with love and pride. This dress was not something to be ashamed of. Neither was she. Elena lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The ivory felt cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. Familiar. Like coming home after a long journey. She had decided to play Chopin's Ballade, no, 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult and emotional pieces in the classical piano repertoire. She had learned it during her final year at music school and had performed it only once before. But she remembered every note. It was burned into her memory, into her heart, into her bones. The room fell silent. Even the whispers stopped. Everyone was watching. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She let the noise of the world fade away. She let go of the fear, the doubt, the humiliation. She let go of everything except the music. Then she began to play. The first notes floated into the air like a question. Soft, gentle, almost hesitant. The melody was simple at first. A quiet conversation between the left hand and the right. But beneath the surface, something deeper was stirring. Elena let her fingers move on their own. She did not think about technique or timing. She did not worry about mistakes. She simply played. The music grew stronger. The melody became more complex, weaving through emotions like a river, flowing through different landscapes. There was sadness in it, longing, the ache of dreams that never came true. But there was also hope, strength, the stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. Elena played with her whole body. Her shoulders swayed gently. Her eyes remained closed. Her face showed every emotion the music carried. It was not just a performance. It was a conversation, a confession, a prayer. The guests in the ballroom sat frozen. Forks hung in midair. Wine glasses remained untouched. Conversations had died completely. No one moved. No one whispered. No one even seemed to breathe. A woman in the third row pressed her hand to her chest. Tears were streaming down her face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. An older man near the window set down his drink and leaned forward in his chair. His expression had changed from polite boredom to something like wonder. Even the servers standing along the walls had stopped working. They stood still, trays in hand, completely captivated. The music built toward its climax. Elena's fingers flew across the keys, producing cascades of notes that filled every corner of the ballroom. The Steinway sang under her touch, its voice rich and powerful and full of life. And then, just as quickly, the storm passed. The melody softened again. It became tender and fragile, like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. Elena played the final notes slowly, letting each one ring out before fading into silence. She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them back in her lap. For a moment, there was nothing. Complete silence. Elena's heart was pounding again. But this time, it was different. This time, it was the kind of pounding that comes after you have given everything you have. Then the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then another, then 10 more. Within seconds, the entire ballroom had erupted into thunderous applause. People rose from their seats. They stood up, one by one, until everyone in the room was on their feet. Elena opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. She saw faces full of emotion. She saw tears. She saw smiles. She saw people looking at her in a way no one had looked at her in a very long time. Like she mattered. Like she was someone worth seeing. Her own eyes grew wet, but she blinked the tears back. She was not going to cry. Not yet. Near the front of the room, she found Richard Worthington. He was still sitting in his chair. He had not stood up with the others. His wine glass was still in his hand, but he had not taken a sip. His face was blank. The mocking smile was gone. The amusement had disappeared. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Elena did not look away. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting the silence speak for itself. She had not played for him. She had not played to prove anything to him or anyone else in this room. She had played for herself, for her mother, for every dream she had buried and every hope she had abandoned. But if her music had wiped that arrogant smile off his face, even for a moment, that was enough. The event coordinator rushed over to her, her face glowing with relief and amazement. "That was incredible," she whispered. "Where have you been hiding?" Elena just smiled softly and said nothing. She looked back at the piano, at the beautiful keys that had carried her through the storm. She ran her fingers lightly over them one more time. For the first time in 10 years, Elena Vasquez felt like herself again. And the night was not over yet. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Elena sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the sound. She had forgotten what this felt like. The warmth of appreciation, the energy of a moved audience. The beautiful noise of people clapping not because they were supposed to, but because they truly meant it. Slowly, she stood up from the bench. Her legs felt a little shaky, but she managed to give a small bow. The applause grew even louder. A few people in the back started cheering. The event coordinator appeared at her side again, still looking stunned. "Stay close to the stage," she whispered. "Mr. Worthington is about to give his speech. He requested live piano during the donation appeal. Can you play something soft in the background while he speaks?" Elena nodded. She sat back down at the piano and waited. The lights shifted, and a spotlight landed on the podium at the center of the stage. Richard Worthington rose from his table and made his way toward the microphone. His walk was confident, his posture perfect. He looked like a man who had given 1,000 speeches and expected this one to be no different. But something was off. Elena could see it in his face. The usual arrogance was still there, but underneath it, something had cracked. His jaw was tight. His eyes kept darting toward her at the piano. He reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The ballroom fell silent once again. "Good evening, everyone," he began. His voice was smooth and practiced. "Thank you for joining us tonight at the Worthington Foundation Gala. As you know, this year, we are raising funds for music education programs in underserved communities." He paused and glanced down at his notes. Elena began playing softly in the background. A gentle melody. Nothing fancy. Just enough to fill the silence between his words. "I have given this speech many times," he continued. "Every year, I stand up here and talk about how important music is, how it transforms young lives, how it gives children from difficult backgrounds a chance to dream bigger." Another pause. He looked out at the crowd, then back at his notes. Then, unexpectedly, he pushed the notes aside. "But I am going to be honest with you tonight," he said. His voice had changed. It was quieter now, more real. "Until about 20 minutes ago, I am not sure I actually believed any of it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged confused glances. This was not part of the usual script. Richard Worthington turned and looked directly at Elena. Earlier this evening, I did something I am not proud of, he said. I mocked this woman. I made fun of her dress. I laughed at her in front of my friends because she did not look like she belonged here. Elena's fingers froze on the keys. She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. I thought I was better than her, he continued. Because of my money, because of my name, because of the suit I am wearing and the watch on my wrist. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. The ballroom was completely silent. No one moved. No one whispered. Every eye was fixed on the billionaire at the podium. That woman just played the most beautiful music I have ever heard in my life, he said. She did not need a fancy dress or an expensive education or a famous name. She just sat down at that piano and made everyone in this room feel something real. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He paused to collect himself. I have spent my whole life measuring people by what they have. By their bank accounts. By their connections. By the labels on their clothes. He let out a long breath. Uncrossed. Tonight, I learned that I have been measuring the wrong things. Elena felt tears building in her eyes. She blinked hard, trying to hold them back. Richard Worthington turned to face her fully. I owe you an apology, he said. What I said to you earlier was cruel and inexcusable. I am sorry. And that I win. And that, the words hung in the air. Elena did not know how to respond. She had expected many things from this night. An apology from the billionaire, who had humiliated her, was not one of them. She gave a small nod. It was all she could manage. He turned back to the crowd. Tonight is supposed to be about raising money for music education, he said. But I think it should be about something more than that. It should be about recognizing talent wherever it exists. It should be about giving opportunities to people who deserve them, not just people who can afford them. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. The crowd watched in surprise as he opened it and began writing. I was planning to donate $100,000 tonight, he said. That is what I give every year. It is a nice number. It looks good in the newspaper. 80. He tore the check from the book and held it up. But that is not enough. Not anymore. He crumpled the check in his hand and tossed it aside. A gasp went through the crowd. I am going to do something different this year, he said. Something that actually matters. He looked at Elena again. Miss Vasquez, would you please come up here? Elena's heart nearly stopped. She stared at him, frozen in place. The event coordinator gave her a gentle push from behind. Somehow, her legs carried her to the podium. She stood beside Richard Worthington, feeling completely out of place. The spotlight was blinding. The faces in the crowd were a blur. This woman taught me something tonight, he said to the audience. She reminded me that talent does not care about zip codes. Dreams do not check your bank account at the door. Music does not ask permission to change lives. He turned to face Elena directly. You trained at one of the best music schools in the country, he said. But you never graduated. Why? Elena swallowed hard. Her voice came out rough and quiet. I had to take care of my mother. She was sick. There was no one else. A soft murmur of sympathy passed through the crowd. And now? He asked. What do you do now? I teach piano lessons. To children in my neighborhood. Most of them cannot afford to pay much. But they love music. So I teach them anyway. Richard Worthington nodded slowly. Something shifted in his expression. It was not pity. It was respect. How many students do you have? About 15 right now. I teach in my apartment. It is small, but we make it work. And if you could do anything, he said, if money was not a problem. Elena was silent for a moment. No one had ever asked her that question. Not in 10 years. I would open a music school, she said finally. A real one. In my neighborhood. Free lessons for any child who wants to learn. Piano. Violin. Voice. Everything. A place where kids like my students could have the same chances I had. She paused, her voice growing stronger. A place where no one would ever feel like they do not belong. Richard Worthington smiled. Not the cold, mocking smile from earlier. A real smile. Warm and genuine. Then that is exactly what we are going to build, he said. He pulled out his checkbook again and wrote a new check. When he finished, he handed it to Elena. She looked down at the number written on the paper. $5 million. The ballroom erupted into applause once more. People cheered. But Elena barely heard any of it. She stared at the check in her trembling hands, unable to speak. $5 million. Enough to build a music school. Enough to change hundreds of lives. Enough to make every sacrifice she had ever made worth something. She looked up at Richard Worthington with tears streaming down her face. Why? She whispered. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because you reminded me who I used to be, he said quietly. Before I forgot what really matters. Elena clutched the check to her chest and let the tears fall. For the first time in 10 years, she allowed herself to believe that dreams could still come true. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. People Elena had never met came up to shake her hand. Women in designer gowns told her she was inspiring. Men in expensive suits asked for her phone number so they could donate to her future school. Business cards were pressed into her palms. Champagne was offered to her again and again, but Elena could not focus on any of it. Her mind kept drifting back to the check folded carefully in her hand. $5 million. It still did not feel real. When the event finally ended and guests began leaving, Elena slipped away to the service corridor. She needed a moment alone. A moment to breathe. A moment to process everything that had just happened. She leaned against the wall and stared at the check under the dim hallway light. Her name was written on it in neat handwriting. Elena Vasquez. $5 million. For a music school. Her hands were still trembling. The door opened behind her, and Rosa rushed in. Her neighbor's face was streaked with tears, and she threw her arms around Elena without saying a word. I saw everything, Rosa finally said, pulling back to look at her. I watched from the kitchen. Elena, I am so proud of you. So proud. Elena laughed and cried at the same time. I still cannot believe it happened. Believe it. Rosa said firmly. You deserve this. You have always deserved this. They held each other for a long moment. Then Rosa wiped her eyes and smiled. Now go home. Your mother is waiting. She is going to lose her mind when you tell her. Elena took a taxi home that night. She could have taken the subway like she always did, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she allowed herself one small luxury. The streets of the Bronx looked the same as always. Familiar buildings, familiar corners, familiar faces, even at this late hour. But Elena saw them differently now. She saw possibility everywhere she looked. That empty lot on the corner where kids played basketball. That could be a music school. That old community center with the broken windows. That could be a concert hall. That little girl sitting on the stoop, humming a song to herself. She could be a future pianist. Elena smiled and let herself dream. When she reached her apartment building, she climbed the stairs slowly. Her legs were tired. Her feet ached from standing all night. But her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small and cramped, just like always. The old upright piano sat in the corner, its keys worn from years of use. The furniture was second-hand. The walls needed painting. But it was home. Her mother was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, wrapped in a blanket. She was supposed to be asleep by now, but she had waited up. She always waited up when Elena worked late. Mija, her mother said softly. How was your night? Mija, how was your night? Elena walked over and knelt beside her chair. She took her mother's wrinkled hands in her own and looked into her tired eyes. Mama, she said. Something happened tonight. She told her everything. The humiliation, the broken-down pianist, the decision to play, the music, the apology, the check. Her mother listened without interrupting. Her eyes grew wider with each part of the story. By the time Elena finished, tears were rolling down both of their faces. $5 million? Her mother whispered. Elena nodded and showed her the check. Her mother stared at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Elena with the expression of pure love and pride. "I always knew," she said. "I always knew. You were meant for something special. Even when things were hard. Even when you had to give up your dreams for me. I knew this day would come." Elena shook her head. "I did not give up my dreams for you, Mama. I put them aside for a while. There is a difference." Her mother reached out and touched Elena's face gently. "You are going to build something beautiful," she said. "Something that will last long after both of us are gone. Children will learn to play piano because of you. They will find joy because of you. They will believe in themselves because of you." Elena could not speak. She just held her mother's hand and cried. The next few months were the busiest of Elena's life. She met with lawyers. She filed paperwork. She looked at buildings. She hired architects. She interviewed teachers. Richard Worthington kept his word. Not only did he provide the money, but he also helped connect Elena with people who could make her dream a reality. He introduced her to contractors who gave fair prices. He connected her with music professors who wanted to volunteer. He even came to visit the construction site himself, wearing jeans and a simple shirt instead of his usual expensive suits. He was different now, quieter, more thoughtful. He asked questions instead of giving orders. One afternoon, while they were walking through the half-finished building, Elena finally asked him the question that had been on her mind for months. "Why did you change? That night at the gala. What really happened?" Richard was silent for a moment. They stopped near a window that looked out over the neighborhood. "When you started playing," he said slowly, "I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I cannot even describe it. It was like you reached inside my chest and found something I thought was dead." He paused, his eyes distant. "I grew up poor, you know. Most people do not know that. I changed my story when I became successful. But the truth is, I was just like those kids you teach. I had nothing. Music was my escape too." Elena stared at him in surprise. She had never imagined that. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot where I came from," he continued. "I got so busy counting my money that I stopped counting what really mattered. That night, when you played, you reminded me of the kid I used to be. The kid who believed in something bigger than bank accounts." He turned to look at her. "You did not just change my mind, Elena. You changed my heart." Elena did not know what to say, so she simply nodded, and they continued walking. 1 year later, the Vasquez Academy of Music opened its doors. It was a beautiful building, 3 stories tall, bright windows, a small concert hall, practice rooms with soundproof walls, a library filled with sheet music, and at the center of it all, a brand new Steinway grand piano. Over 300 students enrolled in the first year. Children from the neighborhood, kids who had never touched a piano before, teenagers who thought music was only for rich people. They all came through those doors and found something waiting for them. Possibility. Elena's mother cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. She was in a wheelchair now, her health slowly declining, but her smile was brighter than ever. Richard Worthington stood in the back of the crowd, clapping quietly. Above the entrance, a plaque was mounted on the wall. Elena had chosen the words herself. "Your gift is not for you. It is for everyone who needs to hear it." On opening night, there was a small concert in the main hall. Students performed pieces they had been practicing for months. Parents cried. Teachers beamed with pride. And at the end of the night, a 12-year-old girl from 2 blocks away sat down at the Steinway grand piano. She was nervous. Her hands were shaking, but she closed her eyes took a deep breath, and began to play. Chopin's Ballade. No. 1 inch, G minor. Elena watched from the front row, tears streaming down her face. She was wearing her mother's navy blue dress, the same one she had worn to the gala. The fabric was still faded. The hem was still frayed, but she had never felt more beautiful in her life. The music filled the hall. And somewhere in the back of the room, a little boy, who had never touched a piano before, leaned forward in his seat, eyes wide with wonder. A new dream was just beginning.